And when I say they're giving a green light for continual austerity, there is literally plans now that have just been announced today for welfare cuts worth billions of pounds. Nobody voted for this. People voted for Boris Johnson to increase paying benefits in line with inflation. That was a policy in our manifesto. They wanted state investment in infrastructure, in schools, in hospitals, and they wanted a bunch of other things alongside that, which have now all been scrapped by an unelected prime minister who's now appointing unelected people into roles in government. People who've been given peerages so that he can put them in his own cabinet. These welfare cuts are completely unnecessary and incredibly draconian. The changes affecting hundreds of thousands of people from 2025 would save £4 billion from the welfare budget. The proposals would see many more people forced to find work despite suffering from a range of physical and mental health conditions. This is literally targeting the disabled. This is utterly revolting. It's demonic, the shit that they're doing. The proposals follow the announcement in March that the government wants to scrap the work capability assessment. I told you all, didn't I tell you all those months ago, when we first heard that they were scrapping the work capability assessment, that wouldn't be used as a way of being able to try and make disabled people less reliant on continual humiliating examinations to get access to additional state support. It would be used as an excuse to take that state support away. I promised you all that it would have happened, and here we are. The state support is now being stripped back all over again. Eligible claimants currently receive £390 a month on top of their universal credit payment, as they well should. If the proposals are enacted, people who, for instance, are in severe pain while awaiting an operation or have some kind of mental health condition such as depression and anxiety may not receive the additional payment would be expected to look for work. They are trying to essentially engage in what I can only describe as eugenics against the disabled. That's what this comes down to. They are deliberately targeting disabled members of our society and using them as a scapegoat to try and reduce the structural deficit, which, as we've just seen from what we were talking about with that Mariana Mazzucato clip, is something that doesn't matter as long as you actually are spending the money in the right places. And I would argue to you that there is no justification on trying to remove spending on things like keeping the disabled fine and not indeed immiserating them by taking away money that they need to be able to survive and pushing them into work that they are completely unsuitable for. That's why they have a disability and why they are out of work. Okay? The BBC understands the changes would initially affect new claimants. Existing recipients of benefit payment would eventually be brought into the new system towards the end of the decade, but were given a transitional protection if their benefits were to be cut. Both Chancellor Jeremy Hunt and Mel Stride, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, have spoken in recent months of their desire to get more people off benefits and into work, which, to be fair, is being used as well as being able to punish people who are persona non grata, namely disabled people that have been attacked in the media. Remember that Telegraph article that we covered before? Attacking people who are getting Motability recipients, right? Trying to find out how much money that you spend of your taxation on things like welfare, which mostly goes to pensions, may I remind you, and not indeed those who can't work because they're too disabled. And again, puts more pressure on the health service, as I said, as Bilderberg rightly points out in chat. The reason why they're doing it on top of using a scapegoat like the disabled is specifically being done to try and cool the labour market. I don't know how many times I have to continually tell people this, but they don't realise this. This was the whole point about scapegoating the scroungers under David Cameron. It was being used to cool the labour market, to drive down the bargaining power of labour as an inflationary control mechanism during the Cameron and Osborne era of austerity and the supply-side labour market reform. What they're trying to do by reducing the welfare state, by pushing more people into the labour market, is there being more people competing for the same amount of jobs, which reduces the bargaining power of labour. The reason why we've had an increase in wages, why we've had an increase in union activity, is because labour's power is high bargaining power, because of the tightness of the labour market, right? Pushing people out of the welfare state is a way of being able to make sure that you can drive down wages. It's why wages have stagnated for 13 years. It's why we've had the biggest drop in living standards since the Napoleonic Wars, because they have deliberately and specifically kept down the wages of working class people in this country and then blamed immigrants for it, right? Oh, it's just immigrants that are doing it. No, it's your government policy on labour market reform. And benefit reform to take more people out of benefits is a specific way of decreasing the bargaining power of labour, as well as engaging as what Martin Arnold has correctly identified as trickle-down eugenics, which is a very good way of describing what's happening here. Mel Stride said more than 2.5 million people were on benefits and inactive due to long-term health conditions. They won't indeed fund the health service to get these people back on their feet. No, they'll just punish them. I would also like to point out as well, comes in specific context too. It's not just the context of what we're seeing in the labour market. It's in the context of the UN being found by a UN envoy with a violation of international law over poverty levels. Remember when there was a UN special rapporteur a few years ago talking about human rights violations of the disabled and a human catastrophe, no less? This is where we're at, not just with the disabled, but with everybody else in the country as well, right? Not just people who are disabled, who have the worst of it because they have to deal with debilitating health conditions, as well as a state that wants to try and essentially treat them as persona non grata. But even just the regular working class people who just are working jobs that don't pay them enough to be able to survive because of these continual dropping living standards, we are in violation of international law over poverty levels. And they're being told by UN special rapporteurs to increase welfare spending. And the first thing that they do, the first welfare policy that they put out, that nobody voted for, it's not in the manifesto, it was against the spirit of the actual manifesto that they were elected on. The first thing they do is to reduce welfare payments, and not just welfare payments for anybody, but for the most vulnerable who are the disabled who can't afford to be able to work. And on top of that, working people as well are seeing their wages and their standard of living go down, lowest drop in living standards since the Napoleonic Wars, as I mentioned before. And this is what's happened. This is where we're at. Working people, disabled people, people on benefits, all of these people are united by the fact that they cannot afford to live under this failed conservative government, this failed neoliberal government, right? When I say conservative government, I don't mean the Conservative Party. I mean a party that believes in the ideology of conservatism, the ideology of the Protestant work ethic, the ideology of neoliberalism. All of these confluence of things coming together at the same time has explicitly created the humanitarian catastrophe that is this government's response to and approach to economics of people who are worse off. Working class people, disabled people, unemployed people, and poor people. They all suffer the same ills under this conservative government, which is social murder. They're creating an evil poison pill for the next Labour government. Exactly. They're deliberately doing this to screw over the next government. It's politicking. It's ideological project that they're doing. It's disgusting. It's revolting. There are no words that can be used to describe the level to which that these people are utterly filthy. They are an absolute stain on the fetid sewer that is the body politic in this country, and they cannot be removed from government quick enough. It's just a shame they're going to be replaced by people with the same fucking ideology. Labour will just nod along saying, oh, we have no money and tough choices need to be made. That's exactly what they'll do. They already know that they've created a straitjacket for themselves. They already know that they cannot climb down on this because part of their fiscal rules is not increasing day-to-day spending, which is what this is. This is a reduction in day-to-day spending, which Labour say they won't increase because it breaks the fiscal rules, unless they create a new tax, which they say they're not going to do, because they have no plans for it. Like, the Labour Party won't reverse this either, given what we know about their fiscal rules. And that's why the Tories feel happy to do it. They know that they're going to trap the Labour Party in a web of their own making. Poverty levels in the UK are simply not acceptable, and the government is violating international law. The United Nations Poverty Envoy has said ahead of a visit to the country this week when he will urge ministers to increase welfare spending. Olivier de Schutter, the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, cited research showing universal credit payments of £85 a week for single adults over 25 were grossly insufficient, and described the UK's main welfare system as a leaking bucket, right? So the people who lose their disabled payment under the new plans we just looked at will be down to the grossly insufficient levels of regular and universal credit that is what is being described as in violation of international law by the UN Special Rapporteur. In an interview with The Guardian 5 years after his predecessor, Philip Alston angered the Conservative government by accusing it of systematic commiseration of a significant part of the British population, the Belgian lawyer risked a fresh confrontation by saying things have gotten worse, which is true. They should be having a confrontation because this government should be an international condemnation, right? People like George Osborne, for the democide that they engage in, should be at The Hague for the crimes against humanity that they've inflicted upon this country through economic austerity, through social murder, right? They should be coming into confrontation. We should be confronting our own government over this. We should be in the streets. Nobody voted for this. The government hit back, insisting that it had not broken international law, only in a limited and specific way, and that absolute poverty had fallen since the Conservatives took power and it was helping thousands into jobs. It is simply not acceptable that we have had more than a fifth of the population in rich countries such as the UK at risk of poverty today, referring to government data showing that 14.4 million people, almost 20% of this country, were living in relative poverty in 21-22, a million more than the previous year. So actually, no, in fact, they haven't reduced the number of people living in poverty. The policies in place are not working, not protecting people in poverty, and much more needs to be done for those people to be protected. I should have said that in the UK, the government had signed an international covenant that created a duty to provide a level of social protection, which ensured an adequate standard of living where it was being broken, with welfare payments falling behind costs for the poorest people, because they won't actually increase spending on this stuff, even though the cost of living has increased. If you look at the price of housing, of electricity, the very high levels of inflation for food items over the past couple of years, I believe that £85 a week for adults is too low to protect people from poverty, and that is a violation of Article 9 of the International Covenant of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. This is what human rights law says. He said increasing universal credit would be the single most important step that the UK could meet towards meeting its international obligations. But, however, they've got plenty of money to spend on quantum computing, right? They've got plenty of money to be able to hand off to Michelle Mone, plenty of money to hand off to all of their people who got crony contracts, like Lex Greensill, for example. Plenty of money for that shit. Money to protect vulnerable people in this country, both disabled, in work and out of work alike. No, nothing. On top of the fact that they failed on housing, they failed at energy policy, they failed on macroeconomics, and this is why the cost of living is spiralling out of control. It's their fault. And what are they doing to remedy it? They're immiserating people even further, creating more people in relative poverty. According to Joseph Rowntree, 3.8 million people experienced destitution. This included about 1 million children. It was 2.5 times the number of people in 2017. The warning signals that Philip Alston gave 5 years ago were not acted upon. There's a huge gap which has increased troublingly between the kinds of indicators the government chooses to assess and its progress on one hand, and the lived experience of people living in poverty on the other. Damning indictment. Send them to The Hague. Send a lot of them to The Hague. It's the only place that they belong for what's happening in Gaza, what they're complicit in right now, and what they're doing to their own population at the same time. Disgusting. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.